My son looked me dead in the eye while the Christmas lights flickered behind him and said, "You have exactly 10 minutes to get your trash out of my house." He thought he was kicking out a helpless, unemployed old man who had nowhere to go in a Chicago blizzard. He thought he was cutting off a leech. What my son Brandon did not know was that the shivering old man standing on his porch had $45 million in liquid assets, a luxury penthouse waiting downtown, and the power to buy and sell his entire life with a single phone call. I tightened my grip on my battered suitcase and smiled for the first time that night, because he had just failed the final test. Before I tell you how I brought my own family to their knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. The wind off Lake Michigan was not just cold, it was violent. It felt like invisible knives were slicing through the thin fabric of my worn-out wool coat. I stood on the front porch of the colonial house in the suburbs, a house I had secretly paid off 3 months ago, though my son and his wife had no idea. I brushed the snow off my shoulders and took a deep breath. The icy air burned my lungs. This was it, the moment of truth. I had rehearsed my line all the way from the bus stop. I practiced the tremor in my voice. I practiced the slump in my shoulders. I needed them to believe I was defeated. I needed to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing left to give. I rang the doorbell. I could hear laughter inside. I could smell roasted turkey and cinnamon. It was the smell of a family warmth I had been craving since my wife Catherine passed away 4 years ago. The laughter died down as soon as the chime echoed through the house. It took a long time for someone to come to the door. Finally, the heavy oak door swung open. It was Monica, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a red silk dress that probably cost more than my fake monthly salary at the warehouse. She did not smile. Her eyes immediately dropped to my hands. She was looking for bags. She was looking for gifts. When she saw only my small battered duffel bag and my empty hands, her expression soured like she had just tasted spoiled milk. "William," she said, "you are late. We already started eating." She did not step aside to let me in. She stood in the doorway blocking the heat. I shivered, letting my teeth chatter a little louder than necessary. "The bus was delayed, Monica. The snow is terrible out here. Can I come in? It is freezing." She sighed, a long, dramatic exhale that puffed out like smoke in the cold air. "Well, wipe your boots thoroughly outside. We just had the hardwood floors refinished, and I do not want slush everywhere. Brandon is already in a mood, so try not to ask him for anything tonight." I wiped my boots on the mat until my feet were numb. I walked into the hallway. The house was warm, almost suffocatingly so. It was decorated like a magazine cover. Silver garlands, white velvet stockings, a 12-foot tree that touched the cathedral ceiling. I knew exactly how much that tree cost, because I had seen the charge on the credit card I let them use. But there was no greeting for me. Brandon was sitting at the head of the table, carving the turkey. He looked up, knife in hand. His face was flushed, likely from the expensive wine I could see open on the sideboard. "Hey, Dad," he mumbled, not even putting the knife down. "Grab a plate from the kitchen if you want some. We are out of breast meat. You will have to settle for the dark meat." I walked to the kitchen, my joints aching. I could hear them whispering as I left the room. Monica hissed, "Did he bring the check? It is the 24th. He usually brings the check on the 24th. Brandon whispered back. "Relax, Monica. He probably has it in his pocket. Just let him eat, then we will ask." I returned to the dining room with a small plate. I sat at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for unexpected guests or children who misbehaved. My grandson Noah was sitting opposite me. He was 10 years old, and the only pure thing in this house. His eyes lit up when he saw me. "Grandpa Bill," he shouted, trying to get out of his chair. "Sit down, Noah," Monica snapped. "Finish your vegetables. You can talk to Grandpa later." Noah sank back into his chair, looking small and defeated. I winked at him, and he gave me a tiny secret smile. That smile was the only thing keeping me from walking out right then and there. I took a bite of the dry turkey. It was tasteless, but I forced it down. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Brandon poured himself another glass of wine and finally looked at me properly. "So, Dad," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you are quiet tonight. Usually you are complaining about your back or the bus schedule by now. What is up? Did you get the Christmas bonus from the warehouse? We were thinking of upgrading the home theater system next week, and your contribution would really help." This was the moment. I put my fork down. The metal clinked against the china, ringing out in the silence. I looked at my son. I looked at the man I had raised, the man I had put through private schools, the man I had protected from the harsh realities of the world. I looked at Monica, who was scrolling on her phone, barely paying attention. "I did not get a bonus, Brandon," I said softly. Monica stopped scrolling. Her head snapped up. "What do you mean you did not get a bonus?" "Everyone gets a holiday bonus, even the janitors." I cleared my throat. "It is worse than that. The company, Build Right Hardware, they are downsizing. They laid off 40% of the floor staff today." I looked down at my hands, feigning shame. "I lost my job, son. They let me go this afternoon." The silence that followed was not the silence of shock or sympathy. It was the silence of a calculator processing an error. I watched Brandon's face. I waited for him to say, "I am so sorry, Dad." I waited for him to say, "Do not worry, you have us." I waited for the son Catherine and I had raised to appear. Instead, Brandon dropped his wine glass onto the table. It didn't break, but red wine splashed onto the white tablecloth. "Are you kidding me?" he shouted. His face turned a deep, ugly shade of red. "You lost your job. On Christmas Eve. Are you serious right now?" Brandon. "Honey, calm down," Monica said, but her voice was sharp, panic edging into her tone. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing into slits. "William, this has to be a mistake. You have union protection, don't you? You cannot just lose your income. How are you going to pay your share of the utilities? How are you going to pay for your room and board?" I looked at them, letting the hurt show on my face. I hoped you could help me for a while, just until I find something else. I have a little savings, but— "Help you," Brandon interrupted, slamming his hand on the table. Noah jumped, dropping his fork. "Help you, Dad, look around. Do you think this lifestyle is free? We have expenses, huge expenses. We just put a deposit down on the Aspen ski trip. We have the lease on the BMW. We have Noah's private tuition. We are barely scraping by as it is." I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream. Barely scraping by, I had been secretly paying their mortgage of $3,200 a month for the last 6 months. I had set up a dummy corporation to funnel the payments to their bank so they would think it was some kind of banking error or a grant they had lucked into. They never questioned where the money came from. They just spent the extra cash on designer clothes and dinners. And now the moment the extra money from my warehouse wages threatened to stop, they were panicking. "We can't carry you, Dad," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a cold, hard tone. "We are not a charity. We let you stay here for 6 months because you were contributing. That was the deal. If you are not bringing in money, you are just extra weight." Monica chimed in, wiping her mouth with a napkin, as if the conversation was making her physically ill. "And honestly, William, it is not just the money. It is the space. We were actually going to talk to you tonight anyway. I need that guest room back. I am starting my beauty influencer channel and I need a dedicated studio. A 68-year-old man coughing in the next room is not exactly the vibe I am going for." My heart turned to stone in my chest. "You were going to kick me out anyway," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Even if I had the job, Brandon avoided my eyes. He looked at the wall, at the ceiling, anywhere but at his father. Look, it is not kicking you out. It is just transitioning. You need to find a place that suits your stage in life. Maybe a state facility, or one of those senior shared living spaces. You know, with other people your age. Grandpa can stay in my room, Noah suddenly shouted. He stood up on his chair, his little face red with defiance. He can have the top bunk, I don't mind. Don't make Grandpa go. Noah, sit down, Monica screeched. This is adult business, no. Noah yelled. You guys are being mean. It is Christmas. You can't kick Grandpa out on Christmas. Brandon stood up. He walked over to Noah, grabbed him by the arm, and hauled him off the chair. That is enough. Go to your room. Now. But Dad, now, Brandon roared. He dragged my screaming grandson out of the dining room. I heard them go up the stairs. I heard a door slam. Then I heard the lock turn. My son locked his own child in a room for trying to show kindness. That was the moment the last thread of hope snapped. That was the moment William, the warehouse worker, died, and William Carter, the ruthless CEO, woke up. Brandon came back downstairs, adjusting his cufflinks. He was breathing hard. He looked at me and his eyes were dead. There was no love in them. Only annoyance. Only calculation. You need to go, Dad, he said. Tonight, I asked. It is a blizzard, Brandon. The buses stopped running an hour ago. Call an Uber, Monica said, picking at her fingernails. Although I doubt you can afford one now. Maybe you should start walking. There is a shelter downtown. If you hurry, you might get a bed before they lock up. I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, but my spine felt made of steel. I looked at the unfinished turkey. I looked at the expensive tree. I looked at the couple standing before me, two people who consumed everything and gave nothing. I will go, I said. My voice was steady. I did not sound like a victim anymore, but they were too self-absorbed to notice the change in my tone. I picked up my duffel bag from the hallway where I had left it. I did not look back at the dinner table. I walked to the heavy oak door. Brandon followed me, not to say goodbye, but to make sure I actually left. He stood with his hand on the doorknob. Don't make this weird, Dad, he said. Just figure it out. You are a grown man. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? That is what you always taught me. I looked at him one last time. I memorized his face. I memorized the arrogance in his jawline, the cruelty in his mouth. I wanted to remember exactly what he looked like at the height of his hubris. Merry Christmas, Brandon, I said. He didn't answer. He opened the door, and the wind howled, blowing snow into the hallway. I stepped out into the storm. The door slammed shut behind me. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Click. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the snow hit my face. It was freezing, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt a fire burning in my gut. I felt the adrenaline of a hostile takeover. I walked down the driveway, dragging my suitcase through the snowdrifts. I walked past the neighbors' houses with their blinking lights and inflatable Santas. I walked until I turned the corner out of sight of the house that was no longer my home. I stopped under a street lamp. The snow swirled around me like a white curtain. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a phone. Not the cracked prepaid flip phone I used around Brandon and Monica. This was a satellite-encrypted smartphone made of titanium and glass. I pressed a single button on the speed dial. It rang once. Yes, Mr. Carter? A calm, professional voice answered. It was Mitchell, my attorney and right-hand man for 30 years. I am done, Mitchell, I said. My voice cut through the wind. The experiment is over. There was a pause on the other end. I am sorry to hear that, sir. Was it bad? It was necessary, I replied. Bring the car around. I am on the corner of Elm and 4th. And Mitchell. Yes, sir. Cancel the transfer for the mortgage payment. Cancel the autopay on the utilities, and initiate the freeze on the credit cards. Tonight, right now. Understood, sir. Mitchell's voice didn't waver, and the portfolio I looked back toward the direction of my son's house. I could almost saw the warmth of the windows from here. They were probably toasting to their freedom right now. They were probably laughing about how easy it was to get rid of the old man. They had no idea that the roof over their heads was technically owned by a shell company I controlled. They had no idea that the food in their fridge was paid for by my dividends. Burn it, I said. Burn it all down. Start with the liquidity. I want them to feel it by tomorrow morning. Consider it done, Mr. Carter. The car will be there in 2 minutes. I hung up the phone. A pair of headlights cut through the darkness down the street. A long, sleek black Bentley rolled silently over the snow, looking like a predator gliding through the water. It pulled up to the curb next to me. The driver leaped out an umbrella, already open, shielding me from the snow. "Good evening, Mr. Carter," he said, taking my battered duffel bag as if it were Louis Vuitton. "We have the penthouse heated to 72 degrees, and I have a bottle of the Macallan 1926 waiting." I stepped into the back of the car. The leather was warm and smelled of success. I settled back into the seat as the door closed, shutting out the storm and the noise and the betrayal. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I wasn't William the warehouse worker anymore. The wolf was back in charge, and the hunt had just begun. The heavy door of this Bentley clicked shut, and instantly the howling wind of the Chicago blizzard was replaced by a silence so profound it felt like I had stepped into a vacuum. The air inside was not just warm. It was conditioned, scented with old leather and faint cedar, a smell that had defined the last 40 years of my life before I decided to play this foolish game of poverty. I slumped back against the hand-stitched leather seat, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. My bones ached. The damp cold from the walk to the bus stop and the agonizing weight on my son's porch had seeped deep into my joints, but now the heated seats began to work their magic, thawing the physical chill even if the ice in my heart remained frozen solid. James, my driver for over 2 decades, did not say a word. He knew better. He simply engaged the privacy partition, insulating me further from the world. I reached for the console on my left. My hands were shaking, not from the cold anymore, but from the adrenaline of the severance. I poured a glass of the Macallan 1926. The amber liquid swirled in the crystal tumbler, catching the light of the street lamps passing by outside. This single glass cost more than the entire dinner my daughter-in-law had just served me. I took a sip, letting the fire burn down my throat, washing away the taste of that dry, loveless turkey. I began to strip off the costume. That is what it was. A costume. The frayed wool coat I had bought at a thrift store. The scuffed boots I had intentionally distressed with sandpaper. The cheap flannel shirt that scratched my neck. I peeled them off with a sense of revulsion, tossing them onto the floor of the car like infected rags. Under the seat, in a custom-made compartment, waited my reality. A robe made of vicuña wool, soft as a cloud and black as a starless night. I pulled it around my shoulders, and as the silk lining touched my skin, William the warehouse worker evaporated. In his place, William Carter returned. The man who had built Carter Shipping Solutions from a single rusted delivery truck into a logistics empire that dominated the Midwest. I looked out the tinted window as the suburbs gave way to the highway. I closed my eyes and saw her face. Catherine, my late wife. The only person who had ever truly understood the burden of our wealth. I remembered the night she made me promise. It was in the hospital, the machines beeping a rhythm that was too slow, too final. She had grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Bill," she had whispered, "don't let the money ruin him. Brandon is weak. If you give him everything, he will become nothing. Promise me you will make him earn his manhood." I had promised Kate. I whispered to the empty car. I tried. God knows I tried. When I sold the company 5 years ago for $45 million, I didn't do it to retire. I did it to liquidate. To turn concrete assets into power I could wield. I hid the sale from Brandon. I told him the company went bankrupt, that I was living on a pension. I wanted to see if he would step up. I wanted to see if the boy I raised would offer his father a hand when he thought the coffers were empty. Instead, I raised a vulture who only pecked at the hand that fed him, waiting for the beast to die so he could feast on the carcass. I picked up the satellite phone again. It was time. The mourning period for my relationship with my son was over. Now came the business of restructuring. I dialed Mitchell Ross. He answered on the first ring, as he always did, regardless of the hour or the holiday. "We are live, Mitchell," I said, my voice dropping an octave, regaining the command that used to make union leaders and competitors sweat. "I am ready, sir," Mitchell replied. His voice was crisp, efficient. No judgment, just execution. "Do you want to proceed with the primary disconnect immediately?" "Immediately," I said, taking another sip of the scotch. "Let's start with the housing. Break it down for me. Remind me exactly what my ungrateful son thinks he owns versus what I actually own." Mitchell did not need to check a file. He had the portfolio memorized. Currently, Brandon and Monica reside in the colonial property at 42 Oak Creek Lane. The title is held by Blue Horizon Ventures, a shell company solely owned by you. They believe they are paying a mortgage to a bank. In reality, their payments go into an escrow account you control. However, for the last 6 months, you have been subsidizing those payments by $3,200 a month via an anonymous grant structure we set up. "Kill it," I said. The word tasted good. "Terminate the grant. Notify the bank that manages the escrow to process the payments at the full market rate starting at midnight. When the payment bounces, which it will because Brandon doesn't have the liquidity to cover the full amount, I want a foreclosure notice generated. Not sent yet. Just generated. I want it ready to fire." "Understood." Mitchell said, the sound of typing clicking furiously in the background. "And the utilities? They are under the impression that the electric and gas companies have a glitch that keeps their bills low," I said with a dark chuckle. "They called it good luck. I called it a subsidy." "Correct the glitch, Mitchell. Let them see what it actually costs to heat a 4,000 square foot house in a Chicago winter." Done. And regarding the credit lines, this was the masterstroke. I swirled the ice in my glass. Brandon thinks he has a platinum card with a $50,000 limit linked to his own credit score. He doesn't know that card is a secondary line on my black card account. I have been paying the minimums for him for years to keep his credit score artificially inflated. Cut the lifeline I ordered, but don't close the account yet. That is too merciful. I want you to report the card as stolen. Flag all transactions from the last 24 hours as fraudulent. Specifically the ones Monica just made online. Then lower the limit to $500. Let them feel the humiliation of a declined card when they try to buy their next bottle of champagne. Sir Mitchell paused, his voice softening slightly. "What about the boy? What about Noah?" I closed my eyes. The image of Noah crying as he was dragged up the stairs burned in my mind. The only innocent soul in that house of wolves. "Protect the asset," I said firmly. "Noah is the future of the Carter legacy. Brandon is a write-off, but the boy has potential. Move his education trust into an irrevocable status. Designate yourself as the trustee. I want to ensure that even if Brandon ends up living in a cardboard box, Noah's tuition at the academy is paid in full until he graduates college. But block Brandon from accessing a single cent of it. He cannot use the boy's tuition fund to pay his gambling debts. Make that ironclad, Mitchell. It will be done, sir. We are also tracking a significant withdrawal. Brandon attempted yesterday. He tried to access your old pension fund information. He is looking for money, sir. He is desperate." I smiled a cold, shark-like grin that reflected in the window. "He is looking for a corpse to rob Mitchell. But he is going to find out the corpse is holding a shotgun. Let him search. Let him dig. The more he digs, the deeper the hole he buries himself in. I want a full forensic accounting of every dime he has stolen from me in the last year. The borrowed cash from my wallet. The emergency loans he never paid back. Tally it all up. I am going to present him with the invoice. We will have the dossier ready by morning." "Where are you headed now, sir?" "The St. Regis," I said. "I want to see the city from the top. I want to look down on the lights and remember why I built this empire." "And Mitchell?" "Yes, sir. Get the legal team ready for the charity gala next week. I have a feeling my son is going to try to make an appearance. I want to be there to welcome him." "Very good, Mr. Carter. Merry Christmas." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the seat. The car was gliding onto Lakeshore Drive now. To my right, the dark expanse of Lake Michigan churned angry and cold. To my left, the skyline of Chicago rose like a fortress of gold and steel. I looked at the towering buildings, the monuments to ambition and ruthless effort. I fit in here. I did not fit in that soft suburban living room with its petty lies and fragile egos. I smoothed the lapel of my vicuña robe. The transformation was complete. The grieving father had been left back on the porch in the snow. The man sitting in the Bentley was the CEO who had crushed competitors, negotiated hostile takeovers, and survived market crashes. My son wanted a war. He wanted to treat his father like a liability to be discarded. Fine. He would learn the hardest lesson of business: never underestimate the competition, especially when the competition owns the board you are playing on. James turned the car toward the private entrance of the residences. The lights of the garage swallowed us, protecting me from the storm. I took one last sip of the scotch. It tasted like victory. The game had officially begun, and I held all the aces. Brandon thought he had kicked me out into the cold, but he had merely set me free. And a free wolf is the most dangerous animal in the forest. The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive hush, revealing the foyer of my penthouse at the St. Regis. I stepped out onto the Italian marble floor, the click of my shoes echoing through the vast, empty space. This was home. Or at least this was where my mail was delivered. 8,000 square feet of glass, steel, and minimalist art that cost more than the entire neighborhood my son lived in. The air here was different. It was filtered, scrubbed of all impurities, kept at a constant 72 degrees. It smelled of nothing. It smelled of a vacuum. I walked into the main living area, shedding the vicuña robe and draping it over a leather armchair that no one had sat in for 3 years. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Chicago, a sea of glittering amber and white lights stretching out into the black void of the lake. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking. And it was the loneliest sight I had ever seen. I walked to the bar and poured myself a glass of water. My throat was still dry from the scotch and the bitter taste of betrayal. I looked around the room. A Picasso hung on the far wall, a chaotic jumble of shapes that Catherine had loved, and I had merely tolerated. Now without her, the painting just looked like a mess, a reflection of my own fractured family. I had bought this place for us. We were supposed to travel to host galas to enjoy the fruits of 40 years of labor. But cancer doesn't care about quarterly earnings or diversified portfolios. It took her in 6 months, leaving me alone in this castle in the sky. That was why I had gone to Brandon. That was why I had put on the costume of a warehouse worker. I didn't just want to test him. I wanted to escape this silence. I wanted the noise of a family dinner, the sound of a television blaring in the next room, the annoyance of a cluttered hallway. I wanted to feel alive again. But tonight my son had made it very clear that my life was an inconvenience to his lifestyle. I sat down on the sofa, the leather cool against my back. The silence pressed against my ears. Then a vibration in my pocket shattered the stillness. It was my personal phone. Not the satellite business line, but the personal iPhone I kept linked to my primary banking alerts. I pulled it out. The screen was glowing with a notification from American Express. Transaction alert, Neiman Marcus Online. Amount $3,450. Status pending. I stared at the screen. My heart skipped a beat, not from shock, but from a heavy, sinking realization. When I left the house amidst the chaos of being evicted, I had left my wallet on the entryway table. It contained a secondary black card. It was a card I rarely used, but it had a high limit. I had left it there on purpose. A subconscious test. Or maybe just a trap I hoped they wouldn't step into. They hadn't even waited for my body to get cold. I had been gone for less than 45 minutes. I was likely still technically in transit, yet Monica was already online shopping. She must have found the wallet the moment the door closed. A normal person, a good person, would call their father and say, "Dad, you forgot your wallet, come back." A decent person would keep it safe. But Monica wasn't decent. She was hungry. Another buzz. Transaction alert, Saks Fifth Avenue. Amount $2,200. Item category luxury handbags. She was testing the waters. She started with 3,000, saw it went through, and now she was doubling down. She probably thought I was so senile I wouldn't notice, or perhaps she thought the card belonged to the company I claimed to work for, and she could get away with it before the account closed. Or maybe, and this was the darkest thought, she just didn't care. She felt entitled to it. Compensation for the inconvenience of having hosted me for Christmas dinner. My thumb hovered over the freeze card button on the banking app. It would be so easy. One tap and the transaction would be declined. The lights on her screen would turn red. The shopping spree would end. I could save them from themselves. I could stop this before it became a felony. Grand larceny. Credit card fraud. If I let this continue, they were crossing a line from being bad children to being criminals. I closed my eyes, wrestling with the ghost of the father I used to be. The father who paid for piano lessons even when Brandon refused to practice. The father who bailed him out when he crashed his first car. The father who always fixed it. If I stopped them now, I was protecting them. But protecting them is what created this monster. Protecting them is why Brandon thinks he can treat people like disposable tissues. I opened my eyes and looked at the city lights. They were cold, indifferent, just like my son. If I stopped them now, they would learn nothing. They would just be angry that the free ride ended. They wouldn't understand the magnitude of their greed. No, a lesson needs to be complete to be understood. You don't teach a child not to touch the fire by blowing out the candle every time they get close. Sometimes you have to let them feel the heat. I watched another notification pop up. Transaction alert, Sephora. Amount $800. She was moving faster now. The dopamine hit of spending money that wasn't hers was kicking in. She was drunk on it. I tapped the screen, but I didn't hit freeze. I navigated to the account settings. I went to the tab labeled Daily Spending Limit. Currently, it was set to a safety cap of $10,000 for suspicious activity monitoring. I deleted the number 10,000. I typed in 50,000. Update limit. Confirm. Face ID recognized me. The little checkmark spun and turned green. Success. I sat back, feeling a dark, twisted satisfaction coiling in my gut. I had just handed them the rope. Now I was going to watch them tie the noose. I wasn't just letting them steal. I was encouraging it. I was removing the guardrails. I wanted them to feel safe. I wanted them to think they had hit the jackpot. I wanted them to think the old man was so oblivious, so checked out, that they could drain him dry and he wouldn't notice until the statement came next month. Go ahead, Monica, I whispered to the empty room. Buy the bag. Buy the shoes. Buy the whole damn collection. Another buzz. Transaction alert Apple Store online. Amount $4,000. 2 MacBook Pros. Now Brandon was involved. Monica must have told him. Look, honey, the card works. Dad left his magic card. They were in it together now. Co-conspirators. It wasn't just a daughter-in-law's greed anymore. It was a family enterprise. I stood up and walked to the window, the phone still clutching in my hand like a detonator. I looked down at the streets below, imagining the digital signal flying through the air, carrying their financial death sentence. This was the hardest thing I had ever done. It is easy to cut off a business partner. It is easy to fire an incompetent employee. But to actively watch your own blood commit a crime against you and to facilitate it, it tore a piece of my soul away. I felt a physical ache in my chest, a hollowness where my pride used to be. I wondered if Catherine would hate me for this. Number 1. I shook my head. Catherine hated thieves, and she hated liars. She would be weeping, yes, but she would be standing right next to me, pressing the button herself. I went back to the bar and poured another drink. This time I didn't sip it. I downed it. The burn was necessary. The phone buzzed again and again. It was a symphony of avarice. Transaction alert, Delta Airlines. $6,000. First-class tickets to Aspen. They weren't just buying things. They were buying a lifestyle they thought they deserved. They were booking a vacation to celebrate getting rid of me. That was the final straw. That was the confirmation I needed that I was doing the right thing. They were using my money to celebrate my eviction. I picked up the phone and dialed Mitchell again. He picked up instantly. "Sir, don't flag the card," I said, my voice void of any emotion. "Sir, the algorithm is going to trigger a fraud alert any second. The velocity of spending is—" "Override it," I interrupted. "Call the bank's VIP desk. Tell them it is authorized. Tell them I am making holiday purchases for my family." There was a pause. A long, heavy pause. Mitchell understood what I was doing. He knew the legal implications. If I authorized it, it wasn't technically theft. Not yet. "Sir, if you authorize it, we can't prosecute them for theft later." I smiled a cold, humorless smile in the reflection of the glass. "I am not authorizing the expenditure, Mitchell. I am instructing the bank not to decline the card for suspected fraud based on location. I want the transactions to go through, but I am not signing off on them as legitimate gifts. Let the debt pile up in my name. We will deal with the liability transfer later. When I present the bill, it won't be a credit card statement. It will be a demand for repayment of unauthorized use." I see Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You are letting them dig the hole deep enough to bury the house." "Exactly. Raise the limit to 50,000. If they hit 50, let it decline. But until then, let them eat cake." "Understood, sir. I will handle the bank." I hung up. I sat there for hours watching the total climb. 10,000, 20,000, $32,000. In 2 hours they had spent more than I earned in a year at the warehouse. They were looting a burning building. Around midnight, the buzzing stopped. They must have finally gone to sleep, exhausted from their gluttony, dreaming of their new laptops and their Aspen trip. They were sleeping soundly in my house, under my roof, spending my money, thinking they had won. I stood up and walked to the master bedroom. The bed was huge, king-sized, with sheets made of Egyptian cotton. It was too big for one man. I sat on the edge of the mattress and looked at the photo of Catherine on the nightstand. "I am sorry, Kate," I whispered. "I tried to save him, but you can't save someone who loves the drowning." I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, in the silence of my $8 million penthouse, listening to the wind howl outside, waiting for the sun to rise on a world where I no longer had a son, only a debtor. And tomorrow, the collection agent was coming. 2 weeks is a strange amount of time. It is long enough to form a habit, but short enough to live in a complete fantasy. For 14 days, my son and his wife lived in a bubble of euphoria. I monitored the transaction logs from my penthouse study, watching the data streams like a doctor, watching a fever spike before the crash. They had burned through $45,000 in 12 days. That is an average of $3,750 a day. They didn't just spend. They gorged themselves. They ordered Wagyu beef for delivery. They bought designer furniture to replace the pieces I had bought them years ago. They lived like lottery winners who had forgotten to check the ticket numbers. But gravity always wins. And on the morning of January 7th, gravity arrived in the form of a mailman named Steve. I wasn't there to see it, but I know the layout of that morning perfectly because I wrote the script. It was a Tuesday. The snow had turned to gray slush in the suburbs. Brandon was likely hung over sitting at the kitchen island, surrounded by boxes from Amazon that they hadn't even bothered to open yet. He was probably drinking the expensive coffee Monica had ordered, feeling like the king of the world. Then the mail slot clattered. Usually Brandon ignored the mail. Bills were boring. Bills were for poor people. But this envelope was different. It was bright red. And it was certified. He had to sign for it. I imagine his hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the residual tremors of too much alcohol the night before. He tore open the envelope from the mortgage servicer. He probably expected a statement, maybe a generic notice about interest rates. What he saw was a notice of default. The letter would have been blunt. Dear Mr. Carter, we are writing to inform you that your mortgage payment of $3,200 for the month of January was returned due to insufficient funds. Furthermore, our records indicate that the third-party subsidy program that has covered this account for the past 6 months has been permanently terminated by the grantor. You are currently in arrears. The total amount due immediately to avoid the initiation of pre-foreclosure proceedings is $9,600, including late fees and penalties. I can picture the color draining from his face. For 6 months, Brandon thought he was lucky. He thought the bank had made a mistake, or that he had qualified for some magical government relief program that he never applied for. He never questioned why the money just appeared. He never questioned why his bank account remained full even when he didn't make a deposit. He just consumed. He must have stared at that number. $9,600. He didn't have $9,000. He didn't even have $900. His personal checking account was likely overdrawn because he had been using it to yish for the tips on his Uber Eats orders, assuming the magic money would replenish it. Panic is a cold thing. It starts in the stomach and moves to the throat. Brandon grabbed his phone. He opened his banking app. He refreshed the screen, praying it was a glitch. Account balance negative $412. The subsidy transfer usually hit on the 5th. It was the 7th. The money wasn't late. It was gone. Meanwhile, upstairs, the second hammer was about to drop. Monica was lying in bed surrounded by silk pillows, scrolling through an exclusive online boutique. She had a cart full of goods, a vintage Chanel clutch, a pair of Italian leather boots. Total value $4,800. She wasn't worried. The black card, Dad's magic card, had been working flawlessly for 2 weeks. She pressed checkout. She watched the little spinning wheel. She was already mentally wearing the boots to the charity gala next week. Then the screen flashed. A harsh red banner. Transaction declined. Please contact your card issuer. She frowned. She probably huffed in annoyance, thinking it was a security check. She tried again. Transaction declined. She tried a different card. Brandon's personal Visa. Declined. She tried the debit card. Declined. Insufficient funds. I can hear her voice echoing through the hallway. Brandon. The internet is broken. The cards aren't working. She stormed down the stairs wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. She found Brandon standing in the kitchen holding the red letter like it was a live grenade. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded. "I am trying to buy the accessories for the gala. The black card isn't going through. Did you max it out? I told you not to buy that home theater system yet." Brandon looked up at her, his eyes wide and hollow. "It is not maxed out, Monica. It is worse." He held up the letter. The mortgage bounced. "What do you mean bounced?" Monica snatched the paper. "That is impossible. The house pays for itself. We have that program. The bank error, whatever it is." "It is gone," Brandon whispered. "The letter says the grantor terminated the subsidy." Monica froze. The gears in her head began to turn, grinding against the rust of her entitlement. "Grantor, what grantor? We never applied for a grant." And then the realization hit them both at the same time. It hit them like a freight train. The luck, the bank error, the magic money. It wasn't luck. It was Dad. Silence descended on the kitchen. The pile of unopened Amazon boxes suddenly didn't look like treasures anymore. They looked like evidence. They looked like debt. They looked at each other, and for the first time in weeks, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a sheer primal terror. They realized they were standing on a trapdoor, and I had just pulled the lever. "Call him." Monica shrieked. Her voice wasn't smooth or sophisticated now. It was shrill. "Call your father. He must have done this. He is trying to scare us. He is just having a tantrum because we asked him to leave." Brandon fumbled with his phone. His fingers were slippery with sweat. He pulled up my contact. "Dad, Mobile." He pressed call. He put it on speaker. They stood there huddled over the phone on the quartz countertop, listening to the ringtone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Usually I answered on the 2nd ring. I always answered. I was the safety net. I was the fixer. No matter how much they insulted me, I always picked up because I was desperate for their connection. 4 rings, 5 rings. Pick up, you old fool," Brandon hissed. The ringing stopped. The automated voice clicked in. "The subscriber you have dialed is not accepting calls at this time. Please try again later." Brandon stared at the phone. He blocked me, he tried again. Straight to voicemail this time. He tried the house phone. Disconnected. He tried my old work number at the warehouse. The number for the janitor's station. "Hello," a gruff voice answered. "Is William there? Is William Carter there?" Brandon shouted. "This is his son. It is an emergency." William, the voice laughed. "Buddy William hasn't worked here in 2 weeks. He quit. Said he was going on a long vacation. Said he didn't need the money anymore." The line went dead. Brandon dropped the phone on the counter. He looked at Monica. The reality of their situation began to settle in. They had spent $45,000 on a credit card that wasn't theirs. They were 3 months behind on a mortgage they couldn't afford. They had 0 savings. And the man they had kicked out into a blizzard, the man who had been silently paying for their entire existence, had vanished. "What are we going to do?" Monica whispered. Her face was pale. The boots and the bag were forgotten. "Brandon, I put the deposit for the gala on that card. I put the down payment for the Aspen Villa on that card. If that card is dead, then we are on the hook for all of it," Brandon finished. He looked around the kitchen. The expensive espresso machine, the high-end blender, the crystal vase. Suddenly the house didn't feel like an asset. It felt like a prison. "He is punishing us," Monica said, her eyes narrowing. "He is hiding somewhere. He probably went to a motel. He wants us to beg." "We have to find him," Brandon said, grabbing his keys. "We have to find him and make him fix this. He can't just stop paying. That is..." That is financial abuse. He made us reliant on him and now he cuts us off. We can sue him for this, the logic of a parasite. Blaming the host for dying. They rushed to the garage. They jumped into the BMW. Brandon pushed the start button. The engine sputtered. It clicked. It didn't turn over. What now? Brandon screamed, hitting the steering wheel. He looked at the dashboard. A light was flashing. Remote immobilization active. Contact finance company. He hadn't paid the car lease in 3 months either. I had covered that too. And this morning I had instructed the leasing company to activate the GPS kill switch. They sat in the dead car in the cold garage surrounded by their empire of dirt. For the first time, the silence wasn't comfortable. It was heavy. It was the sound of a check coming due, and the account was empty. Brandon put his head on the steering wheel and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a man realizing he had sawed off the branch he was sitting on. Monica didn't comfort him. She just stared straight ahead, her mind racing, not about how to apologize, but about who else she could manipulate to get out of this mess. But she didn't know yet. I had already closed all the exits. The walls were closing in, and the roof was about to collapse. And I was just sitting in my tower watching the demolition begin. The Uber smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap pine air freshener. It was a Toyota Camry with a cracked windshield, a far cry from the heated leather seats of the BMW, sitting dead in my son's garage. Brandon sat in the back seat, his knees pressed against the driver's seat, picking at a loose thread on his Italian trousers. Monica was next to him, her face illuminated by the harsh blue light of her phone. She wasn't checking Instagram anymore. She was checking the balance of every obscure gift card she could find in her purse, trying to scrape together enough money for a llama sinuosus that wasn't from a drive-through. They were on their way to Build Right Hardware, the massive warehouse store where I had spent the last year moving boxes and sweeping floors. To them, it was a place of shame, a place where their father embarrassed them by doing manual labor. But today it was their only hope. They weren't going there to apologize. They weren't going there to bring me home because they missed me. They were going there because they viewed me as a mismanaged asset. They needed to find the cow so they could milk it one last time before it died. I watched the security feed from my iPad in the penthouse. I had asked the store manager Rick to alert me the moment they arrived. Rick was a good man. He was one of the few people who knew my real identity. He knew that the old man sweeping aisle 4 was actually the owner of the logistics company that shipped half his inventory. When I told Rick about the plan, he didn't laugh. He just nodded and said, "Leave it to me, Mr. Carter. I will give them a performance they won't forget." The Uber pulled up to the curb. Brandon and Monica stepped out into the slush. They looked out of place in the industrial parking lot. Brandon in his camel hair coat, and Monica in her faux fur vest, dodging puddles of gray water, like they were navigating a minefield. They walked through the automatic doors, their noses wrinkled against the smell of sawdust and fertilizer. They marched straight to the customer service desk. I turned up the volume on the feed. "Excuse me," Brandon demanded, tapping his knuckles on the counter. "I need to speak to the manager. Immediately." The young girl at the register popped her gum. "Regarding what?" "Regarding an employee," Monica snapped. "A former employee. William Carter. It is a family emergency." Rick stepped out from the back office. He was a large man with a thick beard and a name tag that looked too small for his chest. He saw them and didn't smile. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag and leaned against the counter. "Can I help you folks?" Rick asked, his voice slow and deliberate. "My name is Brandon Carter. I am William Carter's son. We are looking for him. He hasn't answered his phone in 2 weeks. We know he worked here. We need to know where he is." Rick looked them up and down. He took his time. He let the silence stretch until Brandon began to fidget. "William, yeah. I remember William. Old guy. Quiet. Always talked about his grandson. Where is he? Brandon interrupted. Is he here? Is he in the back? Rick shook his head. No, he is not here. I had to let him go 2 weeks ago. Christmas Eve, actually. Sad business. Why, Monica asked, her eyes narrowing. Why did you fire him? He was stealing boxes. Rick lied smoothly. The script I gave him was perfect. He said he needed cardboard to insulate his coat. Said it was too cold outside. I told him, Bill, I can't have you sleeping in the break room anymore. It scares the customers. He smelled like he hadn't showered in a week. I watched Monica's face. A normal person would feel a pang of heartbreak hearing that their father was sleeping in a break room and stealing cardboard. But Monica didn't look sad. She looked relieved. Her eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. So he is homeless, she asked. Like officially homeless, Rick nodded solemnly. As far as I know. Last I saw him, he was heading toward the south side. There is a soup kitchen down on 5th Street. Place called The Last Stop. He said something about getting a hot meal there. Brandon let out a breath he had been holding. He exchanged a look with Monica. I knew exactly what they were thinking. If I was homeless, if I was sleeping in boxes, then I was desperate. And if I was desperate, I would sign anything for $100. They didn't see a tragedy. They saw an opportunity. Did he pick up his last paycheck? Brandon asked. Rick checked a clipboard. Matter of fact, no, we have a check here waiting for him. $240. We will take it, Brandon said, quickly reaching out his hand. We are his family. We will ensure it gets to him. Rick pulled the clipboard back. I can't do that, son. Against company policy. Hand-to-hand only, or mailed to a verified address. But since he doesn't have an address, Brandon clenched his jaw. Fine. Whatever. We don't care about the $200. We need to find him for legal reasons. Legal reasons, Rick raised an eyebrow. Is he in trouble? No, Monica interjected, her voice sickly sweet. No, we are worried about his estate planning. You know how old people get. He is confused. He has some assets, some small accounts, that need to be managed properly. If he is on the street, he might lose his identification. He might lose his access to his government benefits. We just want to protect him. Protect him. The irony tasted like ash in my mouth. They wanted to protect the Social Security check. They were terrified that if I was homeless, the state might intervene and take control of my finances, cutting them off from the source. Rick leaned in close. Look, I shouldn't tell you this. But I saw him yesterday, where Brandon and Monica asked in unison. He was at a diner near that soup kitchen. Joe's Greasy Spoon, sitting in the back booth nursing a cup of coffee for 3 hours. He looked rough. He was talking to himself. Something about losing his family. Something about a betrayal. Brandon rolled his eyes. He is senile. He doesn't know what he is saying. Rick shrugged. Maybe. But if you want to find him, go there around lunchtime. He seems to haunt that place. But be warned, he doesn't look like the man you knew. We can handle it, Brandon said, adjusting his coat. We just need him to sign a few papers. Then we will get him into a proper facility. State funded. Monica whispered under her breath. Thank you for your time, Brandon said stiffly. He turned on his heel and marched toward the exit, Monica trotting behind him on her heels. I watched them leave the store. They walked with a new energy. They had a lead. They had a target. They weren't lost anymore. They were hunters closing in on a wounded animal. I picked up my phone and texted Rick. Perfect performance. Put a bonus in your own account today. Then I texted my lawyer, Mitchell. They took the bait. They are heading to the diner tomorrow. Make sure the paperwork is ready. The fake papers and the real ones. I leaned back in my chair. My son and his wife were driving toward the south side thinking they were going to corner a confused, broken old man and bully him into signing over his livelihood. They were expecting to find a victim. They had no idea that they were walking into a courtroom, and I was the judge, jury, and executioner. The diner wasn't a shelter. It was the stage for their final humiliation. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling again, covering the city in white. Tomorrow I would have to put the costume back on. I would have to smudge dirt on my face and wear the clothes that smelled of mildew. I would have to look into the eyes of my own child and see nothing but greed staring back. It broke my heart, but it strengthened my resolve. A surgeon cannot tremble when he makes the incision, and tomorrow I was going to cut the cancer out of my life once and for all. Let them come. Let them bring their papers and their pens. I had a pen of my own, and mine wrote in permanent ink. Joe's Greasy Spoon was the kind of place where hope went to die, suffocated by the smell of burnt bacon and stale cigarette smoke that had seeped into the vinyl booths decades ago. I sat in the corner booth, the one furthest from the door, wearing a flannel shirt I had rubbed with sandpaper to fray the collar and a coat that smelled of mildew. I had not shaved in 3 days. I had rubbed a little charcoal under my fingernails. To the casual observer, I was a man at the end of his rope. To my son and his wife, who were currently parking their rental car outside, I was about to be a payday. I checked my watch. It was a cheap plastic digital watch I had bought at a drugstore for $10. It was 1:18 in the afternoon. They were 18 minutes late. That was part of their power play. Make the old man wait. Make him anxious. Make him feel like his time is worth nothing, so that when they finally arrive, he is just grateful to be acknowledged. The bell above the door jingled aggressively. Brandon walked in first, ducking his head as if he were entering a contaminated zone. He was wearing a cashmere scarf wrapped tight around his neck, trying to create a barrier between himself and the poverty of the establishment. Monica followed her heels, clicking loudly on the sticky linoleum floor. She looked around with open disgust, her nose wrinkling, as she spotted a waitress wiping down a table with a gray rag. I slumped my shoulders. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I made my hands tremble as I lifted the chipped ceramic mug of lukewarm water to my lips. I was the picture of defeat. They spotted me. Brandon didn't smile. He didn't wave. He just marched over his face, set in a mask of grim determination. He slid into the booth opposite me without saying a word. Monica sat next to him, placing her designer bag on her lap, as if the table itself might infect it. "You look terrible," Dad, Brandon said. That was his opening line. Not hello, not are you okay, just an insult wrapped in an observation. I have been better, I stammered, keeping my voice raspy. It is cold out there, Brandon. The shelter was full. I didn't know where to go. Monica rolled her eyes. She picked up the laminated menu, looked at the grease stains on it, and dropped it immediately. Well, you didn't have to run away like a fugitive, William. You embarrassed us. Do you know how hard it was to find you? We have been worried sick. Worried, I asked, looking up with wide, watery eyes. You were worried about me. Of course we were, Brandon snapped, though his eyes were scanning the room, checking to see if anyone important was watching. We are family, Dad. Even if you made some terrible decisions. The waitress walked over a tired woman named Betty, who had been in on my plan since I started coming here. What can I get you folks? Coffee, Brandon said. Black, and a water for her, and for him, Betty pointed her pen at me. He is fine, Monica said quickly. I am a little hungry, actually, I whispered. I haven't eaten since yesterday. Brandon sighed, a loud theatrical exhale that shook his whole upper body. Fine. Get him a grilled cheese. The cheapest one. And bring the check with the food. We are in a hurry. Betty nodded and walked away, shooting me a subtle wink. So Brandon leaned across the table, invading my space. We need to talk about the mess you left behind, Dad. Mess? I asked innocently. The financial mess, Monica hissed. She leaned in too, her perfume overpowering the smell of the diner's fryer. When you left, you didn't just leave a suitcase. You left a disaster. Do you remember that black credit card, the one you left in the hallway? I nodded slowly. The one the company gave me. Brandon slammed his hand on the table. No, Dad. Not the company, it was under your name. And guess what? 'Cause you were careless, because you left it out and someone got the numbers, someone hacked it. I blinked, feigning confusion. Hacked it, yes, hacked it, Monica said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. They spent thousands of dollars, William. Thousands. On computers, on flights, on luxury goods. It was a rampage. And because the card is in your name, the bank is coming after us because the address on file is our house. I looked down at my trembling hands. Oh no, oh God. I didn't mean to. I thought I put it away. You didn't, Brandon said coldly. You were negligent. And now the debt collectors are calling our house. They are threatening to take everything. They are threatening to take the house, Dad. Noah's home. He paused to let that sink in. He was using his own son as a weapon. He was telling me that my grandson would be homeless because of a debt that he and his wife had racked up themselves. It was gaslighting of the highest order. It was psychological torture. I started to cry. It wasn't hard. The tears were real, but they weren't for the reason he thought. I was crying for the little boy I used to hold, the boy who had turned into this monster. I am so sorry, I sobbed. I didn't know. How much is it? $50,000. Monica lied. The actual number was closer to 48, but she rounded up. She was always greedy. I don't have $50,000, I wailed. I have nothing. Look at me. I have $200 that the warehouse owes me. We know, Brandon said, his voice softening. He thought he had me broken. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me. We know you don't have the money, Dad. We aren't expecting you to pay it out of your pocket. Then how I wiped my nose with the back of my hand. We spoke to a lawyer, Monica lied. A specialist. There is a program for seniors in your situation. A debt relief program. If we can prove that you are mentally unfit to manage your finances, we can transfer the liability to a state fund. It will wipe the debt clean. I looked up, hopeful. Really? You can do that, yes, Brandon said. But we need to act fast. The bank is going to foreclose on Tuesday. We need to file the paperwork today. Right now. He reached into his designer briefcase and pulled out a blue folder. He opened it on the sticky table. Inside was a stack of documents. Thick legal documents with lots of fine print. This is a power of attorney. Brandon explained, pointing to the signature line at the bottom of the first page. And a guardianship transfer. Basically, it just says that you trust me to handle this debt for you. You sign this, and I can go to the bank and tell them to back off. I can save the house. I can save Noah. I squinted at the paper. The text was small. I should read it. Do I need my glasses? There is no time, Dad. Monica snapped, then caught herself and lowered her voice. I mean, the notary is waiting for us. If we don't get this signed in 10 minutes, we miss the deadline for the court filing. Do you want us to lose the house? Do you want Noah to sleep on the street like you? No. I whispered. No, please. Then sign it. Brandon pushed a heavy gold-plated pen into my hand. Just sign where the sticker is. We will take care of the rest. We will take care of you. I held the pen. My hand was shaking violently. This was the moment. The document in front of me was indeed a power of attorney. I had seen the header. If I signed it, Brandon would have legal control over every asset I owned. He would find the bank accounts, the penthouse, the stock portfolio. He would drain me dry and leave me in a state nursing home to rot. But he had made a mistake. He was arrogant. He hadn't bound the documents. They were loose pages in a folder. I need some water, I rasped. My throat is closing up. Monica huffed and shoved her glass of water toward me. Here, drink. I reached for the glass with my left hand, while my right hand rested on the folder. I brought the glass to my lips, and then with a convulsive jerk, I dropped it. The glass shattered on the table. Water splashed everywhere onto the table, onto Monica's silk blouse, onto Brandon's lap. "Oh my God!" Monica screamed, jumping up. "You clumsy old fool! Look at my shirt, damn it, Dad!" Brandon yelled, brushing water off his pants. Chaos. Perfect chaos. While they were both standing up, wiping themselves and cursing, I moved. It took less than 2 seconds. I swept the wet folder off the table, letting it fall to the floor with the debris. "Oh, I am so sorry." "Save the papers." I cried out, diving under the table. I was hidden by the tablecloth. In the darkness under the booth, I reached into the lining of my oversized coat. I pulled out an identical blue folder. Inside this folder, there was no power of attorney. There was a document titled Promissory Note and Confession of Judgment. It stated that the undersigned borrowers Brandon and Monica Carter acknowledged a personal debt of $50,000 to William Carter, payable immediately, with an annual interest rate of 20%, compounded daily. It also included a clause that secured the debt against any future assets they might acquire. I shoved the wet original folder into my coat and threw the new dry folder onto the seat of the booth. I climbed back up, looking frantic. "I saved them, I saved the papers, they are dry." Brandon snatched the folder from the seat. He didn't check it. He was too busy being angry about his wet trousers. He just flipped to the back page where the signature sticker was. "Just sign the damn thing," he yelled. "Stop ruining everything." I took the pen again. I looked at the page. It was the signature page of my document. I signed my name, William Carter. "Now you witness it," I said, pushing the folder toward them. "The lawyer said you have to sign as witnesses to make it legal." Brandon didn't even read the header. He was blinded by rage and greed. He grabbed the pen and scribbled his name. Brandon Carter. Then he shoved it to Monica. She signed it too, cursing under her breath about dry cleaning bills. "There," Brandon said, snatching the folder and shoving it into his briefcase. "It is done. We are leaving." "Wait," I said. "What about me? Are you taking me with you?" Brandon stood up, buttoning his coat. "We can't, Dad. The house, it is a mess. And with the bank coming, it is not safe. You stay here. We will call you when the debt is cleared, maybe in a week or two." "But I have nowhere to go," I pleaded. "Use the $200 from the warehouse," Monica said, not even looking at me. "Get a motel room. You will figure it out. You always do." They threw a $20 bill on the table for the grilled cheese I hadn't even received yet. "Goodbye, Dad," Brandon said. They turned and walked out of the diner. They walked out with a spring in their step. They thought they had just secured a fortune. They thought they had tricked a senile old man into giving them the keys to the kingdom. I watched them get into their car. I watched them drive away. I sat back in the booth. The trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I reached into my coat and pulled out the soggy folder they had brought. I tore the power of attorney into shreds and dropped it into the puddle of water on the floor. Betty walked over with a fresh pot of coffee and a grilled cheese sandwich. She looked at the mess. "Everything okay, Mr. Carter?" she asked. I smiled at her, a real smile. "Everything is perfect, Betty." I picked up the folder they had signed my copy that I had swapped in earlier, was still safely in my lawyer's office, but having their fresh signatures on this duplicate was a nice bonus for the file. They just admitted to the debt, I said, taking a bite of the sandwich. And they just signed a confession of judgment. Do you know what that means, Betty? She shook her head. No, sir. It means they just legally agreed that they owe me $50,000 and they waived their right to a trial to dispute it. I can garnish their wages starting tomorrow. I took a sip of the coffee. It wasn't the Macallan 26, but it tasted just as sweet. Did you want to order anything else? Betty asked. Yes, I said, pulling out my titanium smartphone. I want to order a forensic audit. And Betty, keep the change from the 20. My treat. I dialed Mitchell. Did they sign? He asked. They signed, I said, without reading a word. Then we have them, Mitchell said. The trap is shut. Initiate the collection, I said. And Mitchell, send the foreclosure notice to the house. I want it waiting for them when they get back from their little victory lap. I hung up the phone and looked out the window at the gray sky. My son had come here to bury me. Instead, he had just dug his own grave, and he had even paid for the shovel. The pawn shop on 4th Street was a long fall from the marble counters of the bank where Brandon usually did his business. The neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker, casting a sickly yellow light onto the slushy sidewalk. Brandon stood at the counter, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the man behind the glass. On the velvet tray between them lay Monica's engagement ring. It was a 2-carat diamond, or at least that is what Brandon had told her when he bought it 5 years ago. In reality, it was a high-quality lab-grown stone, but right now, he needed the pawnbroker to believe the lie just as much as Monica did. I need $5,000, Brandon said, his voice straining to sound authoritative. It is a temporary liquidity issue. I will be back for it on Monday. The pawnbroker, a man with grease under his fingernails and eyes that had seen every version of desperation Chicago had to offer, laughed. He didn't even pick up the loop. 2,000. Take it or leave it. 2,000. Brandon slammed his hand on the glass. That ring is worth 10. Then sell it to Cartier, the man said, turning back to his magazine. But if you want cash tonight, it is 2,000. Brandon looked at his phone. It was 4 in the afternoon. The winter gala started at 7. The scalper he had found on Craigslist was meeting him at 5:30. The tickets were $5,000 for the pair. He was $3,000 short. He looked at his watch. His Rolex Submariner. It was the only real thing he owned, a gift from me when he graduated college. He hesitated. That watch was his armor. It was the thing that made people take him seriously in meetings. Without it, he was just a guy in a suit. Throw in the watch, Brandon whispered, unclasping the heavy steel band. The pawnbroker smiled, revealing a gold tooth. Now we are talking. 5,000 for the lot. Brandon walked out of the shop 10 minutes later with a thick envelope of cash in his pocket and a bare wrist that felt phantom light. He felt sick, but he also felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The Hail Mary. The winter gala wasn't just a party. It was the hunting ground for the city's elite. Real estate tycoons, tech moguls, venture capitalists. If he could just get in the room, if he could just corner one of them and pitch the luxury condos he was trying to sell, he could make a commission that would wipe out the debt, save the house, and maybe even get the BMW out of impound. He didn't know he was buying a ticket to his own execution. By 6 o'clock, the atmosphere in the Carter household, or rather the house they were squatting in, was frantic. The electricity was still on, but only because the disconnection notice gave a 48-hour grace period. Monica was in front of her vanity, applying layers of foundation to cover the dark circles under her eyes. She was painting on a war mask. She had chosen a silver gown that clung to her body like a second skin. It was meant to signal wealth, sophistication, and icy detachment. We have to be aggressive tonight, Brandon said, pacing the bedroom while he struggled with his bow tie. His hands were shaking again. We target the older investors, the ones who want to park their money in real estate to avoid capital gains tax. I have the pitch ready. I just need you to charm them. Get them talking. Get them drinking. Monica sprayed a cloud of perfume that smelled of jasmine and desperation. Don't worry about me. I can handle the old men. You just make sure you close. We literally have nothing left, Brandon. If we don't walk out of there with a check or a contract, we are eating instant noodles for the rest of our lives. She didn't mention the ring. She hadn't noticed it was gone yet. Brandon prayed she wouldn't look at her hand until after he had closed a deal. They couldn't drive the dead BMW, so they had to call a premium Uber. It cost $80, depleting the last of the cash Brandon had kept for incidentals. When the black Suburban pulled up to the St. Regis, Brandon felt a pang of irony. This was the same hotel where he had heard rumors that a mysterious billionaire had bought the penthouse. He looked up at the towering glass spire piercing the night sky. He had no idea that 60 floors above him, his father was adjusting his own tuxedo and watching their arrival on a security monitor. They stepped out of the car and onto the red carpet. The cold wind was biting, but the heat lamps and the press of bodies kept the chill at bay. Photographers were snapping pictures of the local celebrities. Brandon grabbed Monica's arm and steered her toward the entrance, trying to look like he belonged. He puffed out his chest, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Tickets?" the doorman asked, a formidable man in a top hat. Brandon handed over the envelopes he had bought from the scalper in a Dunkin' Donuts parking lot an hour ago. For a terrifying second, he thought they might be fake. He held his breath as the scanner beeped. Green light. "Enjoy your evening, Mr. and Mrs. Smith," the doorman said. The scalper hadn't even changed the names. Brandon didn't care. He was in. The ballroom was a sea of gold and crystal. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a warm, flattering light on the hundreds of guests. A live orchestra was playing waltzes in the corner. Waiters in white gloves drifted through the crowd with trays of champagne and caviar. The smell of money was everywhere. It smelled like expensive cologne, old leather, and opportunity. Brandon took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and downed one immediately. He needed the liquid courage. "Okay," he whispered to Monica. "Scan the room." "Who do we see?" Monica's eyes darted around like a hawk. "Over there. By the ice sculpture. That is Thomas Sterling. He owns half the commercial warehouses in the Midwest. And next to him is Eleanor Vance. She is the widow of the steel magnate. She is worth billions," good Brandon said. "I will take Sterling. You take Vance. Remember, we are not desperate. We are successful. We are just looking for the right partner for an exclusive opportunity." They split up, diving into the crowd like sharks entering a school of fish. I watched them from the mezzanine level, hidden in the shadows of the VIP balcony. They looked pathetic from up here. They were trying so hard to project power, but their movements were jerky, their smiles too wide, their laughter too loud. They were radiating the scent of fear, and in a room full of apex predators, fear is blood in the water. I saw Brandon approach Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a friend of mine. I had called him earlier. I told him, "My son is going to approach you. He is going to try to sell you a condo development that is currently tied up in litigation. Humor him. Let him think he has you hooked." I watched Brandon talking, using his hands pointing at imaginary blueprints in the air. Sterling nodded, taking a sip of his drink, looking bored but polite. Brandon's face lit up. He thought he was winning. He thought he was 5 minutes away from a commission that would save his life. Meanwhile, Monica had cornered Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a sharp woman, 80 years old, and sharper than a tack. She was listening to Monica chatter about charitable causes and fashion, nodding slowly. Monica was touching Eleanor's arm, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, playing the part of the devoted socialite. She didn't know that Eleanor was the one who had helped me set up the fake charity that was hosting this event. The trap was so perfect it was almost cruel. The entire gala was real, the guests were real, but the purpose of the night had been quietly shifted. The headline event was a silent auction for a new community center. But the real main event was the reveal of the mystery donor who had funded the whole thing. I checked my pocket square. I touched the microphone hidden in my lapel. It was almost time. Brandon made his way back to Monica. They met in the center of the room near the chocolate fountain. "I think I got him," Brandon whispered, his face flushed with excitement. "Sterling is interested. He wants to see the prospectus. He gave me his private number." "Me too," Monica said, her eyes gleaming. "Eleanor invited me to tea next week. She loves my dress." "Brandon, we are going to make it. We are going to be rich." They clinked their glasses together, a toast to their own brilliance. They looked around the room feeling superior. They looked at the waiters with disdain. They looked at the other guests as competition they had already beaten. They were so high on their own supply that they didn't notice the lights dimming. They didn't notice the music stopping. They didn't notice the spotlight sweeping across the room searching for the keynote speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of the M boomed over the speakers. "Please welcome the man who made tonight possible. The chairman of the Carter Foundation and the city's newest and most generous benefactor." Brandon froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. "Carter Foundation," he whispered. "Since when is there a Carter Foundation?" Monica looked confused. "Maybe it is a different Carter. It is a common name." The spotlight hit the top of the grand staircase. The heavy velvet curtains parted. I stepped out. I was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than their car. My hair was trimmed. My beard was gone. I stood tall, my shoulders back, the posture of a man who commands armies. I looked down at the crowd, letting my gaze sweep over the hundreds of upturned faces until I locked eyes with them. Brandon dropped his glass. It hit the floor with a shatter that echoed in the sudden silence. Champagne splattered onto Monica's silver dress, but she didn't scream this time. She couldn't breathe. They stared up at me. They stared at the father they had kicked out into the snow. They stared at the homeless man they had tried to trick into signing a debt waiver. They stared at the ghost they thought they had buried. And in that moment, as I began to descend the stairs, the smile on my face wasn't the warm smile of a father. It was the smile of the landlord coming to collect the rent, and the rent was overdue. The hunting ground had just become a slaughterhouse, and they were the only cattle in the room. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was a place where sound behaved differently. The clinking of crystal flutes, the soft murmur of billion-dollar conversations, and the sweeping notes of the string quartet were all dampened by heavy velvet curtains and plush carpeting, creating an atmosphere of hushed, terrifying exclusivity. From my vantage point in the private mezzanine box, hidden behind a screen of gilded latticework, I watched the ecosystem below. It was a tank of apex predators, men and women who moved with the languid confidence of people who owned the water. And then there were the bottom feeders. I zoomed the camera lens on my tablet to find my son. Brandon and Monica were standing near the ice sculpture of a swan, looking like two deer who had wandered onto a firing range. They were trying so hard. It was painful to watch. Brandon was tugging at the collar of his tuxedo, a rental that didn't quite fit across the shoulders, while Monica was holding her champagne glass too high, her smile fixed and brittle as she scanned the room for a target. They radiated a scent that everyone in that room could smell but them. The scent of desperation. The scent of new debt masquerading as old money. I watched Brandon approach a group of real estate developers. I knew the men he was talking to. They were sharks who would eat my son alive for sport. I saw Brandon offer his hand. I saw the hesitation before the other man took it. I saw Brandon laughing too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny. He was pitching. I could tell by the desperate chopping motion of his hands. He was trying to sell them a dream he didn't own, trying to leverage a status he had already lost. The men listened with polite boredom, their eyes drifting over his shoulder, looking for someone more important. After less than a minute, they turned their backs on him, closing the circle. Brandon was left standing there, his hand still half extended, a frozen smile on his face as the rejection washed over him. He retreated to Monica, who was having no better luck. She had tried to compliment the wife of a senator on her necklace, only to be met with a cold stare and a murmur of thanks before the woman walked away. They huddled together, whispering furiously. I could imagine the conversation. They were blaming the room. They were blaming the atmosphere. They were telling themselves that these people were just snobs, unaware that the only reason they were in the room was because I had allowed the security team to let their black market tickets scan green. Then they saw him, Mitchell Ross. My lawyer was standing near the center of the room holding court. Mitchell was a legend in Chicago. He didn't just know where the bodies were buried. He had dug half the graves. To Brandon and Monica, Mitchell was the Holy Grail. If they could get Mitchell Ross to represent them or even just acknowledge them, it would validate their existence. They didn't know he was the architect of their destruction. They didn't know he was wearing a wire that fed directly into my earpiece. I saw them straighten their spines. They adjusted their clothes. They marched toward Mitchell like soldiers going over the top of a trench. Mr. Ross, Brandon called out, his voice cracking slightly. Mitchell turned slowly. He was holding a glass of mineral water. He looked at Brandon with the expression of a man discovering a stain on his lapel. Brandon Carter, my son said, extending his hand again. We met. Well, I know of your work. Incredible work. I am in real estate. High-end development. Mitchell did not take the hand. He let Brandon's hand hang in the air until Brandon awkwardly pulled it back. I am aware of who you are, Mr. Carter, Mitchell said. His voice was smooth, deep, and utterly devoid of warmth. I believe my firm has sent several correspondences to your residence this week. Regarding a foreclosure matter? Brandon turned pale. He looked around quickly to see if anyone had heard. Yes. Well, that is actually a misunderstanding. A clerical error. That is why I wanted to chat. I was hoping we could sit down and clear up the confusion. My father, you see, he is complicated. Monica stepped in, flashing her teeth. What Brandon means is that we are looking for new representation. Someone who understands complex family trusts. We are prepared to offer a significant retainer. She was offering money she didn't have to the man who was currently suing her. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Mitchell looked at Monica. He looked at her silver dress, which was now stained with a drop of champagne she hadn't noticed. Mrs. Carter, Mitchell said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a shout. I represent clients who build empires, not those who squander them. And regarding your retainer, I would advise you to save those funds. You will need them for the eviction movers tomorrow morning. He turned his back on them. He simply pivoted and engaged in a conversation with a judge standing next to him, effectively erasing Brandon and Monica from existence. They stood there, stunned, humiliated. The rejection was total. They were pariahs. I saw Monica's lip tremble. I saw Brandon's fist clench at his side. They retreated to the shadows near the kitchen doors, the only place where they felt hidden. They looked defeated. They looked small. This was the moment. The stage was set. The players were in position. The house lights dimmed. The chatter in the room died down instantly as a spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating the podium at the front of the room. The orchestra fell silent. The master of ceremonies, a famous news anchor, stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he boomed. Tonight is a night of celebration. We have raised over $2 million for the city's homeless initiative. But we have a surprise. A special announcement regarding the future of this foundation. I stood up in the mezzanine. I buttoned my tuxedo jacket. I checked my reflection in the glass. The man looking back at me wasn't the broken father. He wasn't the warehouse worker. He was the Titan. For years, the MC continued, his voice rising with theatrical excitement. The Carter Foundation has been a quiet pillar of this community. But tonight, the chairman has decided to step out of the shadows. He has decided to personally lead the charge against poverty and neglect in our city. Down below, I saw Brandon perk up. He heard the name, Carter. He grabbed Monica's arm. He was confused. He was thinking, could it be a distant relative? Could it be a coincidence? Please welcome the MC. MC shouted, gesturing to the grand staircase. The man who just donated $10 million to the new shelter project. The founder of Carter Shipping Solutions. Mr. William Carter. The doors at the top of the staircase swung open. I stepped into the light. The applause was thunderous. It washed over me like a physical wave. But I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at the cameras flashing like lightning storms. I looked at one spot in the back of the room. I looked at my son. The reaction was visceral. Brandon dropped his champagne glass. It hit the marble floor and shattered the sound, lost in the applause. His mouth fell open, his jaw unhinged in shock. He staggered back, grabbing a waiter's arm to steady himself. He looked like he had seen a ghost. In a way, he had. He was seeing the ghost of the man he thought he had buried in the snow. Monica screamed. It was a silent scream, her hand flying to her mouth to cover it, her eyes bulging. She shook her head violently, mouthing the word "no" over and over again. No, no, it can't be. I began to descend the stairs. Every step was a sentence in the judgment I was writing. I walked slowly, soaking in their terror. I saw the realization hitting them like physical blows. The money, the house, the grantor, the mysterious billionaire. It was me. It was always me. I reached the bottom of the stairs. The crowd parted for me, creating a path directly toward the center of the room. I walked with the grace of a king returning to his throne. I stopped at the microphone. I waited for the applause to die down. I waited until the silence was absolute. "Thank you," I said, my voice magnified by the speakers filling every corner of the ballroom. I looked directly at Brandon. He was paralyzed. He was shaking so hard his knees were knocking together. He was trapped in the spotlight of my gaze, stripped naked before the entire city. "I stand here tonight," I continued, never breaking eye contact with him, not as a businessman, but as a father who has learned a very expensive lesson. We often think that our legacy is what we leave behind in our bank accounts. But I have learned that true legacy is about character. And sometimes to build character, you have to tear down the rot. The room was silent. They thought I was speaking in metaphors. But Brandon knew. He knew I was speaking directly to him. "Tonight," I announced, pulling a document from my pocket. "I am making a change to my estate. I am announcing the creation of the Noah Carter Trust, dedicated solely to my grandson. And I am announcing that as of this moment, all other family assets are being liquidated to fund this charity." A gasp went through the room, a murmur of shock. Brandon fell to his knees. He physically collapsed. The weight of the truth was too heavy for him to stand. He was on the floor, surrounded by the shards of his broken glass, surrounded by the ruin of his own greed. I smiled. It was a cold, final smile. "Enjoy the party," I said. "And to those who are here under false pretenses, the exits are clearly marked." I turned my back on him. I walked away. And as the applause started up again, louder than before, I didn't look back at the wreckage. I had burned the bridge and the fire was beautiful. The microphone felt cold and heavy in my hand, like a gavel waiting to strike. I stood at the podium, the polished wood smooth under my fingertips, and looked out at the sea of faces. 500 of Chicago's most powerful people were staring back at me. They were expecting a standard acceptance speech. They were expecting me to talk about gratitude, about community, about the spirit of giving. They were expecting the polite, sanitized fiction that usually accompanies $10 million donations. But I wasn't there to give them fiction. I was there to give them the truth, and the truth is often much uglier than any lie. I let the silence stretch. I let it hang in the air until people began to shift in their seats, uncomfortable with the weight of it. I saw the confusion rippling through the crowd. Why wasn't the billionaire speaking? Why was he just staring at the back of the room? Then I spoke. My voice was low, intimate, as if I were telling a bedtime story to a child, but amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. It reached every corner of the ballroom with crystal clarity. I want to tell you a story, I began. It is a Christmas story. But it doesn't have reindeer, and it doesn't have Santa Claus. It starts on a porch in the suburbs in the middle of a blizzard. I saw Brandon flinch. He was standing near the exit, trapped by a wall of waiters and security guards. He couldn't leave. He was frozen like a rabbit caught in the high beams of a semi-truck. Monica was clutching his arm so hard her knuckles were white. She knew. She knew exactly what story was coming. There was an old man. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on Brandon. A man who had worked hard all his life. A man who thought that family was the one investment that never lost its value. This man went to his son's house on Christmas Eve. He didn't have much. He had lost his job at a warehouse. He had a battered suitcase and a heavy heart. And do you know what his son said to him? I paused. The room was deathly quiet. You could hear the ice melting in the champagne buckets. His son didn't say Merry Christmas. His son didn't ask if he was hungry. His son looked at the balance sheet of his life, saw a liability, and decided to liquidate. He gave the old man 10 minutes to pack his trash and get out. He sent his own father into a snowstorm because he didn't match the aesthetic of the holiday dinner. A murmur went through the crowd. I saw shock on the faces of the socialites in the front row. They whispered to each other. Who is he talking about? Is this a metaphor? I leaned closer to the microphone. My voice hardened. It wasn't a metaphor. It happened 2 weeks ago. And the son who did that, the son who chose money over blood, is standing in this room right now. The collective gasp was audible. Heads turned. People began to look around, scanning their neighbors, wondering who the monster was. The spotlight operator, sensing the drama, began to pan the light across the crowd. I didn't need the spotlight. I pointed a finger directly at the back of the room. Brandon Carter. The name hung in the air like a curse. The crowd parted. The people standing near Brandon and Monica stepped away as if they were contagious. Suddenly, my son and his wife were on an island of isolation, illuminated by the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Brandon tried to smile. It was a gruesome, twitching thing. He raised a hand as if to wave, as if to say it was all a joke. But his eyes were dead. He was drowning, and I was holding the hose. You came here tonight looking for an investor, didn't you, Brandon? I asked, my voice booming. You came here to sell condos. You came here to leverage your family name. Well, let's talk about that name. Let's talk about what it means to be a Carter. I pulled a folded document from my tuxedo pocket. It was the deed to the property at 42 Oak Creek Lane. You think you live in a house that you own, I said. You think you are a homeowner. But you are not. You are a squatter. You have been living on my charity for 6 months. Every steak you ate, every bottle of wine you drank, every log you burned in the fireplace. I paid for it. And when I stopped paying, when I pretended to be poor, you threw me away like garbage. Monica began to cry. It wasn't a pretty cry. It was the ugly, heaving sob of a woman watching her social standing disintegrate in real time. Mascara ran down her cheeks, ruining the face she had spent hours painting. Well, the charity is closed, I declared. I ripped the document in half. The sound of the tearing paper was sharp and final. As of this morning, the property at Oak Creek Lane has been acquired by the city for redevelopment. I have sold the land to the municipal council for $1. They are going to bulldoze it to make room for a new community park. A park named after your mother, Catherine. A place where families can actually be together, unlike the house that stood there before. Brandon's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to stay upright. His house. His status symbol. It wasn't just being foreclosed on. It was being erased. It was being turned into grass and swing sets. But I wasn't finished. I wasn't done until the bone was exposed. I looked at the cameras. I knew the gala was being live-streamed. I knew that thousands of people were watching online. This wasn't just a room of 500 people. It was a global audience. And regarding the inheritance, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that forced everyone to lean in. You have spent your whole life waiting for me to die, Brandon. You have spent your whole life calculating how much you would get. You treated me like a bank account with a pulse. I signaled to Mitchell, who was standing by the stage. He nodded. There will be no inheritance, I announced. Not one dime. Not one share of stock. Not one piece of jewelry. I have established the Noah Carter Trust. Every asset I own from my company shares to the shoes on my feet is now the legal property of this trust. The beneficiary is my grandson Noah, and the terms are strict. I stared at Brandon delivering the final blow. The funds are for his education, his health, and his future. But there is a clause, a bad actor clause. If Brandon or Monica Carter attempt to access, manage, or even touch these funds, the entire trust freezes and donates itself to the Red Cross. You are toxic, Brandon, and I have legally quarantined you from your own son's future. The room erupted. Not in applause this time, but in shock. It was the sound of a society witnessing an execution. It was brutal. It was primitive. It was justice. Brandon looked at me. For a second, I saw the boy I used to play catch with. I saw the child who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I felt a pang of agony in my chest. I wanted to run down there and hug him. I wanted to fix it. But I remembered the snow. I remembered the locked door. I remembered the look in his eyes when he told me to get out. You wanted a rich father, Brandon, I said, my voice cracking slightly with emotion. You got one. But you forgot that the rich don't stay rich by investing in bad assets. And you are a bad asset. I stepped back from the podium. I didn't wait for the applause. I didn't wait for the MC to close the show. I turned and walked off the stage, leaving the microphone live, leaving the feedback loop humming in the air. Behind me, I heard the commotion. I heard security moving in. I heard Monica screaming at someone to get away from her. I heard the sound of a world collapsing. I walked through the backstage curtains into the quiet of the corridor. My hands were shaking. I leaned against the cold concrete wall and took a deep breath. It was done. I had just orphaned my own son in front of the world. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. But as I stood there listening to the chaos I had unleashed, I realized something. I hadn't orphaned him. He had orphaned himself the moment he closed that door on Christmas Eve. I just finally signed the paperwork. The morning sun hit the snow-covered streets of the suburbs with a blinding glare, but inside the house on Oak Creek Lane, the atmosphere was dark. I was not there to see it personally. I did not need to be. My presence would have given them someone to scream at, someone to blame. Instead, I sent the only thing they respected, the law. At exactly 8 o'clock, a black sedan pulled into the driveway, followed by 2 moving trucks. Mitchell Ross stepped out, flanked by 3 sheriff's deputies. He walked up the path that I had been kicked off of just 2 weeks prior. He didn't ring the doorbell. He knocked once, hard and authoritative, then used the key I had provided to unlock the door. Brandon and Monica were in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. They had come home from the gala in silence, the weight of their public execution pressing down on them. They looked up, their eyes red and swollen, expecting perhaps a reprieve, expecting a father's mercy. "Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter Mitchell," said his voice filling the entryway. "Per the terms of the foreclosure executed at midnight, you are trespassing on private property owned by the city of Chicago. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises with personal items only. Anything left behind will be considered abandoned property and auctioned to offset your outstanding debts." "But where are we supposed to go?" Monica shrieked, clutching a designer handbag that she hadn't yet realized was a fake asset. "That is not my concern," Mitchell replied, checking his watch. "You have 29 minutes. I watched the feed from the security cameras one last time from the back seat of my car parked a block away. I saw them drag suitcases out into the snow. I saw the neighbors watching from behind their curtains, the same neighbors Brandon had tried to impress for years. I saw the sheriff lock the door. It was the same sound, that heavy click that I had heard on Christmas Eve. But this time I wasn't the one on the outside. I signaled James to drive. We didn't stop at the house. We drove past it. I didn't look at Brandon as he stood by the curb, frantically typing on his phone, likely realizing that his service had been cut off an hour ago. I didn't look at Monica, who was sitting on her suitcase weeping into her hands. I looked straight ahead. We drove to the one place that mattered, the private boarding school just north of the city. Noah was waiting in the administrative office. He looked small in his new uniform, his little legs swinging from the oversized leather chair. When he saw me, he didn't ask about his parents. He didn't ask about the house, he just ran. He ran across the room and buried his face in my coat. "Grandpa," he whispered, "you came back." "I promised, didn't I?" I knelt down, ignoring the ache in my knees, and held him tight. "I promised I would always take care of you." "Is Mom and Dad coming?" he asked, looking over my shoulder. "Not today, Noah," I said softly, brushing the hair from his forehead. "They have some growing up to do, but you and we have a plane to catch." We walked out to the waiting car. Noah held my hand tight, as if he were afraid I would disappear if he let go. We drove to the private airfield where the Gulfstream was waiting. As we boarded, the stewardess offered Noah a hot chocolate. He looked at it like it was magic. I sat in the leather seat by the window as the engines roared to life. I watched the ground fall away as we climbed into the sky. The city of Chicago became a grid of lights, then a patchwork of gray and white, and finally, just a memory beneath the clouds. I looked at the city where I had built an empire, lost a wife, and buried a son. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. For weeks I had carried the heavy stone of guilt. Was I too harsh? Was I cruel? But looking at Noah safe and warm in the seat across from me, reading a comic book without a care in the world, I knew the answer. You cannot save everyone. Sometimes you have to cut the rope to keep the lifeboat from sinking. Brandon and Monica chose the storm. They chose the cold. I simply stopped shielding them from the weather they created. I took a sip of water and opened my book. The chapter on the past was closed. The ink was dry. And as the plane turned toward the sun, heading for a warm island where the snow never fell, I didn't look back. I wasn't William the victim anymore. I wasn't even William the CEO. I was just Grandpa. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The lesson is simple, my friends. Love is unconditional, but support is not. Never let your kindness become someone else's weakness. And never ever apologize for taking back the pen and writing your own ending. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make a hard choice to protect your peace, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption. Until next time, remember that the strongest trees grow in the wildest winds. Stay strong.